The winter night draped white over the frontier. Winds from the north swept down, lashing against the towering walls of Ung Chau, snapping the banner on its rampart before forcing it upright once more. Through the shroud of mist, alarm fires flared, their glow revealing thousands of soldiers laying stones to strengthen the fort's base. Each distant drumbeat pulsed like the heart of a colossal beast crouched in silence before the leap. Across the frozen river, 100,000 Viet troops stood motionless in the snow. They waited for one signal, and one alone, to begin the boldest assault in history. A strike straight into the heart of the Song Empire's defense. No voices broke the silence. Only the creak of bowstrings against cracked skin, the stifled whinnies of frostbitten horses, and the piercing gaze of a general watching through the white night. In that instant, history itself held its breath. If they failed, a whole nation would bear the wrath of heaven's empire. But if they triumphed, it would be Viet's first declaration to the world. We bow to no empire beneath the sky. On the eve of battle, Tai Hui Li Tung Jiet whispered, "Do not wait for the enemy. Strike first and seize the will of heaven." Then the war horn tore the night asunder. Blood, fire, and will fused into a rising hymn of valor, a saga that began in that very breath. If you wish to witness with your own eyes how Viet dared strike first, how a small nation made the Northern Empire tremble amid the snows of Ung Chau, then subscribe and follow me through this journey. For this is more than history. This is a lesson in courage. From the year 1069 onward, as turmoil in the north plagued the Song court, its blades slowly turned southward. Granaries moved, wagons creaked heavily down the road, and frontier garrisons swelled like bony ridges along a spine bending toward Viet. By 1072, when news came that young Li Nhan Tong had ascended the throne, an imperial edict for invasion was sealed. Ung Chau, Kum Chau, and Liam Chau became the three resounding drums beating together the song of war. In Thong Long, the capital remained calm, for Li Thao Hang and Li Tuong Jet stood firm at its pillars. But calmness was not idleness. Secret reports, bound in bamboo tubes, rolled down from the border, ships being built, grain being hoarded, Song cavalry drilling by the river's edge. Li Tuong Jet understood. To strike first is to rule men. Not a mere maxim, but a command dictated by time itself. He unfolded a board of war with two layers. The visible front, armies massing in the west, flaunting banners, drawing the enemy's gaze toward an open gate. The hidden blade, a fleet forged in haste, men rowing as they built, ropes drying on sandbanks, masts planted like a forest of spears. The plan was clear: feint west, strike east, draw the Song forces toward the mountains, then cut through Kum Liam in a swift sea assault. To anchor the navy, the lifeline of logistics had to hold. Field granaries were buried beneath dry leaves, salt wrapped in banana sheaths, enough for both man and steed. At every forge, hammers rang through the night, fashioning iron spikes for scaling ladders and siege carts. Engineers measured ropes, carved frames for catapults. Along the highways, laborers bore rice, 10 baskets of grain to one of salt, one of dried fish, proportions learned from the hard lessons of past campaigns both north and south. The mobilization of elite troops moved in perfect rhythm. Vanguard cavalry from the frontier prefectures marched in squadrons, their horses' backs frosted with salt from the wind. Seasoned infantry were distributed among the camps to drill once more, pushing shield walls, practicing the art of advancing beneath overlapping armor. Li Tuong Jet chose his men with care. For sieges, he needed shoulders that did not yield. For naval combat, hearts that beat strong and wrists that endured. For decoys, soldiers who could act, build vast camps, light great fires, yet never reveal the heart beneath the disguise. By the end of 1074, the campaign unfolded. A naval force of over 30,000, led by the Taihui himself, swept eastward like a dark cloud stalking the horizon. On the decks, rowers exchanged dry, hollow glances. They knew this tide would carry them to a shore no one would expect. In the western borderlands, Thong Dan joined forces with Lud Qi, Tun Kang Fu, and V2 An.
From October 27, 1075, the war drums thundered. The shell of the grand strategy cracked open. V2 An, with barely 700 iron cavalry, pierced through To Mao, driving straight at Ko Van, the weakest point. When their hooves crushed the wet grass, the camp fell like straw catching fire. Wang San, Tai Bing, Ving Bing, fortress after fortress collapsed like hammer blows on an anvil. Infantry and cavalry advanced like the plow of heaven, tearing open the enemy's forward lines. That was the moment when deception turned to truth. As the Western Front roared, Cam Liam thinned like ice ground down by wind. From the sea, the Đại Việt Navy landed, striking as if by miracle. Cam Chau fell on the 30th of the lunar 12th month. Liam Chau collapsed on New Year's Day. In every city, stores of grain, crossbows, silk, and hemp were seized and turned into the strength of Đại Việt. Li Thiang Kiet ordered the gathering of grain as though collecting blood, yet he guarded the people as one guards his own eyes. On the march toward Ung, he had proclamations, the Phat Tong Lo Bu Van, posted everywhere. To read them was not merely to claim legitimacy, but to still the trembling hands of peasants when they saw unfamiliar banners passing by. In some villages, people brought wine and meat to honor the troops. The supply corps recorded each jar, each pig carried under the arm to be repaid later. For now, the goal was clear. The marching rhythm must not break, command banners must not falter, and the spear point must drive unerringly toward the heart of the enemy line, Ung Chau, where the walls were high and the song spirit gathered in one final knot. As the army closed in, the wind on the hilltops cut against their faces. The Tai Ui gazed upon the towering fortress. A direct assault would bleed them dry, yet delay would give time to the foe. On this board already set, only one move remained: to shatter every hope of Song reinforcements before the ladders touched the walls. Disaster upon disaster poured into the Song court. From Ko Van to Cam Liam, every red-waxed dispatch broken open was another knife in the empire's pride. Troops in King Chau and Qui Chau were drawn taut like bowstrings. The imperial order fell upon Chern Tu Thiet to save Ung at all costs. But war despises those who move half a step behind. On the march, Tu Thiet heard of Đại Viet's surging momentum and turned to Tan Chau, encamping at Kang Hua, hesitating, probing. That hesitation cost him a day, and in war, a day is enough to decide the fate of empires. On the walls of Ung, To Jam counted the nights by the flicker of oil lamps. 14 days had passed waiting for reinforcements. The wind made the wicks dance, and from below the ramparts came the intermittent thud of Đại Viet's catapults testing their range. At midnight, he opened the western gate, sending a suicide squad to break the siege with a dispatch for help. In a secret tunnel, a courier slipped through an earthen hatch, but even night has ears. Our scouts caught him on the frozen plain. Under interrogation, the route, the camp, and Chern Tu Thiet's entire plan spilled out like ink over white silk. Li Thiang Kiet decided at once: take 30,000 elite soldiers, cross the mountains by night, and strike at Conlin Pass. Torches bound in pine resin burned long, their smoke clinging to quilted armor. The men ahead carried planks to bridge ravines, those behind carried rice. The whisper, "Step lightly," rippled down the line as they crossed the icy cliffs. Not a single pebble fell. At dawn on the 11th, a thin veil of snow dusted the grass. The two armies caught sight of each other, and on the white plain between them, the generals urged their horses forward. Chern Tu Thiet raised his halberd in challenge.
Young Kiet laughed aloud, gave his name, and charged. The field rang only with the clash of metal upon metal. 10 bouts passed, the horses steamed, and sweat ran hot beneath their armor. On the next exchange, the Tai Yui had read his opponent's rhythm. He leaned aside, feinted wide, and then slashed down the man's spine. The Churng Tuthiet spear scraped the Tai Yui's shoulder, but the momentum betrayed him. The return stroke landed with the weight of an axe through oak. He toppled, and his blood spread crimson over the snow. For a heartbeat, the song lines faltered, their shouts lost to the wind. Our horns sounded the advance, ranks pressed ranks, cavalry cleaved through the middle, and infantry poured in behind. Konlin Pass collapsed in a whirl of chaos, the rescue army shattered. From the hilltop, Young Kiet raised his banner, watching his battle cloak ripple against the pale sky. One front was cleared. Now Ung Chau had no one left to hope for. He ordered a swift return, the main force turning back in time to join Tong Don and Shin Kung Fuk, tightening the noose. Inside the city, Tojam swallowed dryly, knowing that from this day, each sunrise would stretch like a rope around his neck. Back on the battlefield, the siege around Ung thickened with layer upon layer of fortification. Catapults were drawn up to their ideal range, and arrow depots distributed by the hour per man. The drums beat daily in a steady rhythm so the infantry would grow used to smoke, to ladders, to death. Each morning, the engineers measured the distance anew. Each night, carpenters wedged one more rung into the assault ladders. The spiral tightened, closing toward a storm that demanded not only strength, but an answer. For Ung was not Kamlium. Its walls were higher, thicker. Great crossbows sat on its ramparts like giant crabs poised to hurl their bolts. The moat ran deep, and inside the defenders had routes for fire control. Fire attacks could break lines, but without a firm footing atop the wall, a breach would die unborn. Young Kiet understood. To take the city, he must make the wall cease to be a wall. For that, he needed a new road, built from the very earth beneath their feet. Monsoon winds whipped across the battlements, churning black smoke from burning rooftops. Each time the command drum struck, the scaling ladders rose like reeds before a storm. Shielded infantry pressed close, hearing the sharp thwap of Song crossbows, the hiss of heavy arrows slicing past. The first rungs of the ladder held, the fourth shattered. Men fell, dragging those below like a broken string of beads. The lee catapults groaned in rhythm, boulders arcing over the wall like rough moons leaving dark trails in the sky. Inside, bricks crashed and tumbled, yet the rampart stood. The repeating crossbows atop the wall unleashed volleys like rain descending in sheets. Our cavalry could not charge through the fields of stakes and horse traps. They waited for the gate to break, but the gate still held, its iron bar unbroken. Amid the chaos, a few daring squads were granted leave to try. Iron hooks arced over the parapets, 5 men to a rope, climbing like lizards on stone. One managed to peer over the edge, only to see a Song shield blocking his face, and behind it, 4 lances thrust in unison. The lead climber flipped backward, crashing onto his comrades. The crack of breaking bones vanished beneath the roar of the catapults. The plan to climb had failed, and the cold mud drank another layer of blood. Day after day, the siege tightened, yet the walls of Ung Chau still stood. Rations were divided by the hour per man. Each soldier received an extra handful of salt against the cold, but their eyes had sunk deep into shadow. In his command tent, Li Tuong Ket marked one plan after another in chalk, battering the gates with rams, tunneling beneath the walls, hauling the great crossbows within point-blank range. Every option exacted the same price, time. And with every day that passed, the enemy's hope of endurance grew firmer. One bitter evening, a prisoner caught outside the moat begged for mercy, in exchange for a plan. He stammered at first, then confessed everything. Do not treat the wall as a wall. Keep the earth against its base. Make it a slope to climb. The words struck like a hammer on the siege's deadlock. The engineers fell silent, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Li Tuangket slammed his palm on the table. "We need a road upward, and the earth lies beneath our feet." The order was given. The drums beat to a new rhythm. From that night on, instead of ladders, thousands of shoulders bore sacks of earth. The first layer crashed against the wall's base with a thud that echoed like a heart dropping in a chest. The second packed upon the first, tamped down to keep from sliding. Thus began the earthwork stratagem, a solution born from mud, sweat, and the frost-bitten breath in cracked hands. At dawn, the catapults and archers fired in measured rhythm at the upper ramparts, forcing the defenders to duck behind cover. Below, militia and infantry worked in shifts, 2 men to a sack, 5 paces a relay, earth passing hand to hand like water through buckets. Engineers drove stakes to anchor the slope and laid wet reeds to keep it firm. Each time a bag spilled its load, the mound quivered like the back of a surfacing whale. Tojam, seeing the wall's face change by the hour, ordered stones to be dropped. Huge blocks thundered down, gouging trenches in the new slope. But below, repair outran destruction. The next wave of sacks filled the scars left by the last. Where the soil turned soft, the engineers mixed straw with gravel. By noon, the first ramp had reached 8/10 of the wall's height. The second and third advanced to the beat of drums. The walls seemed to sink, not because it yielded, but because the road of Viet was rising. The covering fire intensified. Fire jars burst. Clay pots filled with flaming powder hurled backward. Stones rained down to keep the enemy heads low. Our heavy crossbows targeted the fixed Shang emplacements, splintering their supports. Archers changed bowstrings in turns, their hands bleeding, teeth clenched. Cries of left, shift right, echoed across the moat, keeping rhythm so the ramp would not collapse. By the second day, the slope had eased enough for a shield squad to crawl upward like crabs. Above them, Shang arrows fell like rain. The shieldmen pressed their boards to their chests, wooden pegs set as footholds. Each arrow struck with a jolt that drove them back half a span, only for them to inch forward again. The hoarse shouts of "Hold the line" filled the air. One slip could drag a comrade down. One man who held fast became the anchor for the next. The climax came mid-morning, during the hour of the dragon. The northwestern wall groaned hollowly. The old mortar crumbled to dust. The engineers cried break as sledgehammers struck the weak points, piling earth to concentrate the force. A section of the rampart collapsed, forming a slope's edge. The horns blared. The assault infantry, shields overhead, surged forward like the tide. Above them, the defenders screamed, half in terror, half in fury. Tojam threw his reserves into counterattack, his repeating crossbows screaming in reply. But strength within the city had run dry after 40 days. The fire brigades were out of water. Flames rolled up from the houses lining the inner wall. A Song officer knelt, begging leave to retreat to the inner citadel. Tojam said nothing. He only stared at the reflection of fire on his sword. His decision was sealed in his eyes. To hold was the last honor left. The turning point came when one of our squads planted a small banner atop the wall. The cloth fluttered once in the wind. The signal. The entire line surged. Cavalry waiting by the west gate spurred their mounts. The gate breakers rammed the battering carts, the gate's iron bolts shrieking like beasts dragged from their den. Shieldmen widened the bridgehead along the rampart, letting the second and third waves pour in. By sunset, 3 spearheads joined into one great pincer atop the wall. From that moment, the city was no longer a city, it was conquered ground. When the western gate thundered and burst open, Li Dynasty cavalry poured through like a freezing wind, slicing the streets into ragged lines of chaos. The infantry followed, clearing alley by alley, crushing the last pockets of resistance. Tojam left the ramparts and returned to his family estate. He spoke a few final words, lit a single stick of incense, and vanished with his loyal retainers into the flames. The news reached Taiui Li Tuangket amidst a gust of cutting wind. An enemy general had chosen death rather than capture. In that moment, he stood silent. War has its victors, but sometimes the honor of the defeated compels even the victor to bow his head. Silence ended when duty called. Inspect the granaries and armories, extinguish fires before they spread, record the houses that hung white cloths and plea for mercy. Orders were clear: gather grain as though gathering blood, but spill none needlessly. By early afternoon, the purge signal flag fell and the end signal rose. Ung Chau had fallen after 42 days of siege, the final knot in the South Song defense undone. 3 days later, the army reformed ranks and marched on Ton Chau. But Ton Chau, having heard of Ung's fall, was already hollow. Civilians fled, soldiers cast aside their arms, the gates opened like a cough. The conquest became a mere occupation. Now came the question of strategy. Would advancing further turn victory into a burden? Li Tuongket recalled the First Order: cripple their power to attack, do not hold their land. Supplies were thinning, weapons were wearing down, and soldiers were weary. He chose to withdraw, while the roads were still open and morale still high. On the march home, wagons of rice, bundles of crossbows, axles, and armor trailed behind like the written lines of a completed campaign. In Bienking, the twin reports of Ung and Ton Chau struck the Song court like a slap across the face. Memorials were torn in fury. Orders for mass mobilization were drafted overnight. The real gamble for the empire had only just begun. In Thung Long, the forges bimmed, but the carpenters kept weaving new shields. Everyone understood, if the first blow had won, the next defense must hold. The Nuit River waited for Viet to finish the second verse of the poem Nam Guok Shan Ha. The siege of Ung Chau was more than a victorious assault. It was a model of strategic initiative, combined arms, and turning hardship into advantage. Strike first to seize the will broke the enemy's rhythm. Feints thinned their coastal defense. The engineers, with their earthwork stratagem, turned walls into slopes, all held together by 3 invisible threads: logistics on time, discipline in place, and hearts united. The legacy endures today, the mindset of creating opportunity rather than waiting for it, of shaping stone into slope instead of breaking against it, of stopping at victory to prepare for the next storm. Those choices set Viet upon the path to mastery in the war's second act, the defense at the Nuit River, where Nam Guok San Ha became not merely a poem, but a strategic doctrine.